All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to wait for a few minutes, 2 minutes or so, for people to join. And maybe if we could just check that people can communicate with us via the YouTube comments. Could you comment where you're tuning in from? Just so we can check that the chat function's working and everything. All right. Thanks for joining us. Just going to give a few minutes, as we said. Good afternoon. Oh, where are you joining us from? So we have someone from Cambridge. Any other locations that people are tuning in from? Same here, yeah. It's very nice weather today. It'll be nice to get outside at some point later today for a walk. From Malaysia, cool. Good. Thank you all for joining us. We're just gonna give it a few more minutes. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. All right. Seems like we have 25 people that are tuned in. That's really great. If you haven't already, let us know what location you're tuning in from on the comment, just so we can test the chat function works, so we can test the communication with you. If you've done so already, that's great. We have Cambridge and Malaysia. All right, maybe we'll give it one more minute. All right, let's start sharing my screen. From Devon, nice. Really lovely region. All right, I think we'll get started.
Oh, it's already blurry.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. So my name is Joseph, and there's my colleague Colin with me too. And we're both students in the University of Cambridge at the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology. And today we're going to be talking to you about the work which we do which is about energy and fuels and fuel of the future. So to get us started, I want to start off the discussion today talking about energy, and specifically, what do we need energy for generally in our daily lives? So if you could comment some answers on the YouTube channel, that would be great. You can just type your comments of different things that we need energy for. And then just so we can get a bit of a interaction going, and I'll get us started. One thing we need energy for example, is for lighting.
Okay.
Are there any other things which people can think of that we need energy for?
Looking at that. I
I'll
mean, the
just wait
internet
for the answers to come.
isn't a ridiculous answer. It's true.
So the internet, yep, absolutely. We definitely need a lot of energy for the internet, especially these days. Any other ideas of what we need energy for?
It's a bit of lag on the answers for him, by the looks of things. But
So
that's
I'll
fine.
give another one. Yep, for heating, absolutely. For moving around, driving our cars. Anything else? Transport, space heating. Yep, transport, absolutely. Indeed. So we need energy for construction as well, for producing food, producing other products. We need energy for heating our food or water at home. We need energy for heating our homes. Um, and we need energy for larger transportation, like flying planes or trains or buses,
Suddenly
trucks,
feels
etc.
much more like a
So
class
these are
with
all
all
things that we
this.
need energy for to
You know,
power our lives.
helps people think about these things.
And I want to talk about, where does our energy come from? Where do we get it from? So mostly these days, most of our energy today comes from fossil fuels. So just to gauge, can you give me an example of any fossil fuels? You don't have any examples, so I can get us started with an example. Petrol for our cars is an example of a fossil fuel. Any other examples that people can comment in the comments? Just wait for people's responses. So any other examples of fossil fuels? One is of petrol. I'll give another one. Oil, natural gas, exactly. Good one, Jim. Any other examples of fossil fuels? Just looking at the comments on the YouTube stream. Coal, natural gas, etc. Yep, exactly. So there's coal and there's natural gas. These are the main fossil fuels that we use. So oil we can get from oil wells on land or in the ocean. Coal we mine and we burn in power stations to provide electricity for our homes or offices or factories. And gas or natural gas we have at home to heat our hobs. It's used for other purposes as well. So these are fossil fuels, and we call them fossil fuels because they were made over millions of years of dead plants being buried deep underground, and their fossils building up over millions of years to create these fuels today that we use to power our world. So most energy today comes from fossil fuels. And I want to talk more about what exactly are fossil fuels made of? What are the building blocks, the chemical building blocks which make them up? So we also call fossil fuels hydrocarbons. And the word hydrocarbon, if broken down into two, gives us a hint about what they're made of. So fossil fuels are made of hydrogen and carbon. And here's a very simple example of a fossil fuel. This is made of with one carbon and four hydrogen atoms, and we call this molecule methane. And methane also happens to be natural gas which we have in our homes. Now, when we use fossil fuels or when we burn them for their energy, I want to ask, what products do we make when we burn a fossil fuel? If you can comment any answers that you know of what happens when we burn a fossil fuel, that would be great. Just waiting for the answers. What happens when we burn a fossil fuel? What products do we make? CO2 or CO, indeed. Jamie knows about its incomplete and complete combustion. So yeah, we get carbon dioxide. We also get water. We also get energy from this process. Now, the problem with fossil fuels is that it revolves around this carbon atom here.
Special mention for
So
bit of SWAT.
when we
Yeah, boy.
burn the fossil fuel, this carbon releases carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide is released into our environment, and it builds up in the atmosphere above our Earth, and it traps heat in, sort of like a greenhouse. And sort of like a greenhouse on a hot summer day, the glass of a greenhouse traps heat in. And so as a result, the buildup of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere traps heat, and this causes what we call climate change or global warming, the melting of the ice caps, rising sea levels, and extreme weather conditions. And this is a serious issue which many scientists are trying to solve and overcome to prevent this effect on our planet. And so carbon dioxide buildup in the atmosphere from the carbon, which is in fossil fuels, causes climate change. This is just to get us started. And so what can we do about this? Well, here we have our molecule methane again, and the whole problem is around carbon. So one solution that we have is just to get rid of the carbon and just use hydrogen as a fuel. But the problem with hydrogen being used as a fuel alone, and of course hydrogen we can also burn and it will just produce water and a lot of energy. But the problem with using hydrogen alone is that it's really explosive. And actually hydrogen is a very small molecule, it's really light, so we would need a huge volume to store the energy. So what can we do about this? Well, one thing we can do is try to, similar to how methane is sort of hydrogen attached to a carbon atom, we propose attaching the hydrogen atoms to a different molecule, like nitrogen. And this molecule here is called ammonia. And it's the fuel of the future that we want to talk about today. And the reason why ammonia is really great is that it can store a lot of energy. And as a liquid, it's really easy to move around. In fact, an entire balloon of hydrogen gas, which we're going to show you a video in a second of us blowing it up, all that volume of hydrogen gas can be stored in just a cup of liquid ammonia. And so actually I have the size of the balloon which we blow up. It's pretty big, 24-inch balloon. And all the energy which is contained in this balloon that we're going to blow up could be just contained in this much liquid ammonia. And so that's what makes ammonia quite great, in that ammonia can store more energy, and as a liquid, it's easy to move around and transport and store. And so now I'm going to show you guys a video of us blowing up balloons of hydrogen to show you how explosive they are, but also to show you that that whole energy, all the energy that's contained in that balloon, could be just contained in a cup of ammonia of this much. So I'm just going to share the video if you give me a moment.
Blowing shit up. I mean, that's a pretty big explosion.
Maybe I'll play it again. Just to get a feel for the explosion.
Boom. Things go boom.
And so as you can see, that entire balloon of hydrogen which we blew up, all that energy, as I said, could be stored in just this much liquid ammonia, which is what makes ammonia a great fuel for the future. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Colin.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what ammonia is and what it's actually used for. Can anybody tell me in the chat here on YouTube what ammonia is used for in our daily lives? And just to give you a hint, it's something that keeps us alive. We might not know about it, but it's the reason many of us are alive today. So can anybody tell me what ammonia is used for, or the main thing ammonia is used for in daily life? Just give a second for the answers to come in. Exactly. Fertilizers. So millions of metric tons of ammonia are produced every year right now, mainly for fertilizer. And fertilizer is what allows more crops to be grown on a certain area of land. And in fact, when you look at the numbers, approximately 50% of the global food supply exists because ammonia is used as a fertilizer along with other things, and it's able to produce more food and keep us all alive. But ammonia is also used in other things, including cleaning solutions. Ammonia solutions are often used for cleaning things. And it's also used as a refrigerant, a refrigeration cycle you can do with ammonia, and it can have very unique applications, such as on the space shuttle. Ammonia is used as a refrigerant to actually cool down the solar panels because they can get hot out in space with so much solar radiation. And if you look at the map of ammonia transportation all over the world, you actually see just how extensive ammonia is used in our daily lives, even if we don't realize it, because it's like I said, millions of metric tons are transported all over the world for use as fertilizer. But the question is, where does the energy come from to make ammonia? So right now, unfortunately, ammonia is mostly made using fossil fuels, like Joseph was talking about. The most basic one is methane, and actually methane is one of the primary components for making ammonia from fossil fuels. But you can also make it from coal or petroleum or almost any type of fossil fuel if you really wanted to. But our vision for ammonia is different. So when we look at making ammonia, you have two components. You have hydrogen and you have nitrogen. For the hydrogen, we imagine getting hydrogen from water. So if you take water and you split the water, you get oxygen gas and hydrogen gas. And then as far as the nitrogen is concerned, 80% of the air is actually nitrogen. So we can take nitrogen from the air relatively easily because it's all there ready for the taking. And when we combine these two things, hydrogen and nitrogen, using renewable energy such as solar panels or wind turbines, we're able to make ammonia. And it's for this reason, being able to store this renewable energy, that we consider ammonia to be the fuel of the future, because it's able to store this renewable energy in a dense liquid form, like Joseph and I illustrated, blowing up hydrogen relative to a small volume of ammonia. So to get energy back from ammonia, once you have it stored in there, you decompose it back down. Decomposing just means breaking it apart back into hydrogen and nitrogen. And then you can take that hydrogen and do things with it, like we've already been talking about, like explosions. And you're able to get that energy, and then you just release water, which is a very safe thing compared to CO2, for example. So what we actually do in the lab, and the reason why the both of us are giving this presentation, is that on the one hand, I make ammonia in the lab. So I take hydrogen and I take nitrogen, and I combine them to make ammonia. On the other hand, Joseph takes ammonia and breaks it back down into nitrogen and hydrogen. So the running joke in the lab is that we're constantly in conflict with each other, because I'm constantly making it and he's constantly breaking it down, and we're constantly in conflict. friendly conflict, of course. So just to summarize, we think that ammonia can serve as the fuel for the future because, for one thing, it doesn't have carbon, it has nitrogen instead of carbon. And compared to hydrogen gas, or it has nitrogen, yeah, it has nitrogen instead of carbon. And it can store a lot amount of energy in a small amount of volume compared to hydrogen gas because you can store it as a liquid relatively easily. And our work in the lab focuses on better ways of making ammonia on my side and better ways of extracting energy from it on Joseph's side. And our work is done in the catalysis and process integration group in the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology, led by Laura Torrente. This is a picture of our group back when we used to all be able to be in the lab together. Thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions in the chat.
Yeah, and in fact, we also were planning on doing a little quiz if people are up for that. I'm not sure, Colin, do you think we should do the quiz now or after the questions?
Let's see if there's questions.
Yeah, let's see. If there's any questions in the chat, we can have a small Q&A session now, and then we can do a quiz. Just wait a bit for the questions to come through. All right, Colin, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the question that everybody asks because it's a good question. So
that's the
so
best question.
We need to distinguish between the energy efficiency of the current process for making ammonia from fossil fuels, which is about, I think it's about 70% efficient or so. For us, since we look at the total round trip of making ammonia and then decomposing it and breaking it apart again to get the energy from it, we're looking at approximately 20 to 30% efficiency from energy to energy. I think that's correct. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph.
Yeah, around 20%.
Of course, we're trying to make that better, obviously, but that's where it's at right now.
If there's any other questions. If not, we'll move into a quiz. Oh, how exactly is the ammonia used? Okay, we got more questions. All right, so great question, Ian. How exactly is the ammonia used to produce energy? Is it just burned or used in something like a fuel cell? So there's different options here. The one which I look at in my research is breaking down the ammonia back into hydrogen and then using that hydrogen in say, a fuel cell. But you could also perhaps burn the ammonia directly, but you would have to do that under certain conditions. Some people are looking at burning it with the presence of steam so that you can, so that you don't produce nitrogen oxides, which cause acid rain. And there are people who are also looking at direct ammonia fuel cells, but they are quite low in efficiency at the moment. So there's many different ways which you could utilize, which you could get the energy back from the ammonia. And then we got a question, how is the nitrogen decomposed from the air? I guess they mean how is it obtained from the air, right, Colin?
Right, so there's two components to that question, really. So the air is 80% roughly nitrogen, the other 20% being oxygen, of course, to keep us alive. So as far as separating the nitrogen from the oxygen, you can either use a pressure swing absorption, basically absorb the nitrogen onto a material and the oxygen doesn't absorb, and then you can separate it that way. Or you can use cryogenic distillation. That's just a fancy word for make it really, really cold so that I think it's the oxygen will turn into a liquid before the nitrogen does, and then you can separate it that way. So that's how you get the nitrogen from the air. The other implicit thing in the question is the decomposition of the nitrogen. You have to split the nitrogen apart because when you look at the nitrogen molecule, it has 2 nitrogen, whereas the ammonia molecule has 1 nitrogen. So you must be splitting the nitrogen apart. And the answer to that question is that's the challenging thing about ammonia synthesis, right? So that's a really stable bond. That's a triple bond between the 2 nitrogen atoms and the nitrogen molecule. And what we do and what I do is use catalysis and try and come up with new catalysts in order to make it easier to break that bond apart. So we do it in a catalysis way, but it's still really difficult. And that's one of the main challenges of the work is the actual breaking apart of the nitrogen from the air.
So we have another question. What are the conditions required for this process, e.g. catalyst or temperature? So I guess in your case, Colin, maybe you comment on making ammonia first. I can comment on breaking down ammonia.
Right. So there's two common categories of catalysts for ammonia synthesis. The first one is an iron-based catalyst, and that's what's used right now in industry. That's where all of the ammonia that we use comes from. On the innovative side, you also have the ruthenium-based catalyst, which is better in many ways than the iron catalyst, and that's one of the primary catalysts we look at in the group is a ruthenium-based catalyst. And I think Joseph looks at that primarily as well, but he can comment on that. And then as far as its temperature, that's another, that actually gets back to the previous question about decomposing the nitrogen. In order to break apart the nitrogen, we need high temperatures because you need that energy in order to break the bond apart. So when we're running this catalysis process, when we're using these catalysts to make ammonia and break that nitrogen apart from the air, we're running at over 300 degrees Celsius, maybe over 400 degrees Celsius, somewhere in there, 300 to 400 degrees Celsius. So it's a high temperature process.
Yep, and in terms of the decomposition, also mainly ruthenium-based catalysts are the best, but there's also a lot of research going into iron catalysts. And the conditions for that are around 300 degrees Celsius, but with specific ruthenium catalysts that have been enhanced, it can get as far down as 200 degrees Celsius. So yeah, Jim's asking, do you think this can compete with batteries for iCars? So personally, I'm speaking
He used for use in cars.
For use in cars. I think at the moment, it's quite clear that batteries have a big role to play in car transportation because the battery size is reasonable for a car. I don't think that ammonia can per se compete at the moment with batteries in cars, but it could play a larger role in larger transportation, like in ships, or there's a lot of discussion around ammonia for ship transportation. Anything else you want to say, Colin?
Yeah, I would agree that right now batteries is obviously the best option for cars. I think compared to hydrogen, ammonia is probably actually a better option for the long term for cars. I would be personally, I would feel safer with an ammonia tank on my car than with a hydrogen tank on my car. Just remembering the balloon that blew up, that could be your car with a lot more hydrogen. But yeah, just to reiterate what Joseph said about the shipping, they're actually already looking very, very closely at changing a lot of these ships over to ammonia power because it's just so economical at that scale for a big ship to carry ammonia.
And Edward's asking, how does the energy efficiency compare with storing hydrogen, compressed, refrigerated, or diffused through a solid? That's a very good question. So maybe we could take it one at a time, Colin?
Yeah.
So in terms of the comparison, it varies depending on what form you're storing the hydrogen as, whether it's liquefied, because to liquefy hydrogen, you have to go to really low temperatures, like minus 200 degrees Celsius or super high pressures, versus storing it as hydrogen gas. And it also depends on how you end up getting the energy back from the ammonia, whether by decomposing it or through a solid oxide fuel cell or through burning it in a turbine directly. But generally, the ranges end up being around. I think it's like I can't remember the top of my head, but it's around 10 to 20% um, in terms of the case of hydrogen, or was it? I can't remember. Colin, do you remember?
It was something like that. It was slightly less than the full cycle for compared to ammonia. Because the other thing you have to remember with the liquefaction of ammonia is that you're going to have a burn off just periodically due to the low temperatures. And actually, just we're not experts on this particular area, but if to give a resource on this, if you look for the Royal Society white paper on ammonia, they draw this explicit comparison between a hydrogen, compressed hydrogen, liquefied, and ammonia for different scenarios for like rail transport, truck transport, ship transport, stuff like that. So as far as energy efficiency, just to get back to the original sort of overall question, we don't know specifically about the different types of hydrogen storage listed in the question, but suffice it to say, they're not as energy efficient. Ammonia isn't as bad compared to them as you might think. Ammonia is actually pretty close to a lot of these, considering you have to go to very high pressures for hydrogen, very low temperatures.
And it all becomes a question of scale and of distance to transport as well. So when we get to large scale storage, the vessels that you need to store hydrogen become quite expensive. Also for the distance which you need to transport the fuel. If you're shipping ammonia across several hundreds of kilometers, at some point it will become more economic for you to ship it as ammonia than as hydrogen. If you agree with what I say, Colin?
Yeah. It is a large part of it's about scale. If you need to store energy briefly for a day, you go with hydrogen. If you need to store it for 6 months, you go with ammonia. If you need to transport it 1,000 kilometers or tens of thousands of kilometers, whatever, you go with ammonia. If it's just the kilometer, you go with hydrogen.
Yeah. So it's about scale. So how globally do you think ammonia will be accepted as an energy source, and how will it replace machines that run on carbon? Well, I would say ammonia is already accepted as an energy source for food. So it's already a very well known and handled and transported and distributed chemical. And in terms of replacing machines that run on carbon, well, you could technically. There have been people who have burned ammonia directly in carbon run engines, but there's a lot of NOx is produced. But it's about sort of refitting the technology in order to accommodate for that. Anything else you would say there, Colin?
Yeah, so the acceptance of ammonia is a tricky issue because the perception of a lot of people is that it's very poisonous and it's very dangerous. And it's not that is untrue. It is technically poisonous. But you can also smell it. We've smelled it in the lab before accidentally at 1 or 2 ppms, which is far below what would ever harm you. So yes, it's poisonous, but you can detect it with your nose pretty quickly. And the second thing about ammonia that a lot of people don't realize is that there's a huge disparity between the perception of people who live in, for example, cities or urban areas compared to people who live in rural areas. There was a very interesting study or presentation I saw at an ammonia conference at one point of someone who actually studied perceptions of people in I forget the exact areas they were, but it was a more urban area versus like a rural area in Mexico or the United States, where they use ammonia on a day-to-day basis or something similar to ammonia for fertilizer, and their perception of ammonia is completely different. They think it's completely safe because they work with it every day. They know the sort of safety precautions you have to take and that you can manage these risks. So as far as the acceptance of ammonia, there's a challenge there because it is poisonous, it is dangerous. But if we look at the way that we already use it for fertilizer and the way that people are already able to manage these risks for fertilizer and feel safe doing it, then there is a way open for the acceptance of ammonia, I think.
Mm-hmm. So how does this compare cost-wise compared to hydrogen and other technologies? I think this goes back to the efficiency question before. It depends what scales we're talking. It depends what how far you want to transport the fuel. So it's not a very sort of clear cut. This is the value of the cost comparison.
Right, but our general answer would be that ammonia is competitive in a number of scales.
Indeed.
That makes it a very interesting option. And if you want more information on that, the Royal Society white paper on ammonia is a very good resource.
Indeed. How long on average will it take to store and use ammonia on a large scale? So by that, would they mean like how long we could store it for, or how long the process would take?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was wondering about this question. Like how long would it take for us to transfer over to ammonia? I'm not sure, because as far as like transferring over our energy infrastructure to ammonia, we think it would actually be significantly easier than hydrogen because, as we talked about, there's already an enormous infrastructure of ammonia for fertilizer. And it would be, ammonia is the same whether you use it for fertilizer or energy. So the infrastructure is basically the same. So we think as far as transitioning that over would be relatively simple. How long would it take to store and use ammonia on a large scale? If that means how long does the cycle need to be, the energy cycle? Like we mentioned, we're thinking more in terms of months. Like if you're looking at solar energy in the UK, that's going to be in the summer. And then you're going to need a bunch of space heating in the winter. If you can store that solar energy in the summer in the form of ammonia, which is one of the scales where it would be more economical, and then use it in the winter for space heating or something like that, that's the sort of cycle we're looking at.
And we have a comment from James. Hydrogen would make sense for aeronautics industry and for trains, particularly minimizes the infrastructure needs that would result for hydrogen cars and lorries. Yeah. And then another question is, how will collecting ammonia affect the environment? In that sense, do you think they're saying like the production of green ammonia, how that would affect the environment?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways you can think about ammonia in terms of the environment. So as far as the way that ammonia is produced right now, like I talked about, it's made from fossil fuels, and we don't particularly like that. And it actually accounts for 1 to 2% of all global CO2 emissions are just to make ammonia. That's how much ammonia we make and how much fossil fuels it takes. So right now, making ammonia is very bad for the environment. But if you switch over to the process, as we were talking about, getting hydrogen from water and nitrogen from the air to make ammonia, and you use the energy of renewable energy to make the ammonia, that greatly minimizes the impact on the environment. Obviously, there's some environmental impact to solar panels and wind turbines, but beyond that, it greatly minimizes it.
And lastly, the question is, how long will it take to switch to ammonia machines instead of carbon? Yes, that's what they were trying to ask before about how long. How long?
I see. Okay, so machines for actual machines to run on ammonia, that will take more time. It's still an active area of interest. It's still at the lower levels of technology readiness. It's still, at the lab scale and such. So that will take some time. That's one of the areas that needs improvement. It's the infrastructure for the ammonia that's already there and ready to be used. We just need the technology to use it, to make it cleanly, which is what we're working on. But that will take some time. It's not ready now, but we think in the next 10 years, I'd say. I don't know what you think, Joseph.
Yeah, I would say a 10-year time span makes sense. Yep. All right. Well, that's all the questions that we've gotten. Yeah, I was wondering if it's appropriate to do the quiz or not. I wasn't expecting such technical questions from the audience. I thought it was going to be
don't do the quiz.
perhaps a younger audience. But are there any young audience members? Maybe if there are some, you could comment your age just so that we know. Because we just had a nice short quiz to do, asking some very basic questions. If there are some young audience members present, we're
Right,
happy to do that.
we'll change to this other talk now. So, because I
If you
don't
can
fancy
comment.
doing the quiz, do you? I mean, it will be like the same question.
All right.
Maybe there aren't any kids watching.
Yeah, maybe there aren't. I
we got
thought maybe there
13.
would be parents with their kids or something, but perhaps not. Oh, we have a 13 years old. All right, cool. All
Asking
right.
very good questions.
Yeah. Impressive. So yeah, we just had a quick quiz. I'll run through it then. Um, First question just being which of these is a fossil fuel? We weren't sure what the age range of the audience would be. But it seems like
Water.
a 13-year-old was asking very good questions, so I think this will be a bit of an insult to them. So then the next question was, which are fossil fuels not made of? Nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and then lastly, yeah, what do you get when you burn a fossil fuel? So do you get nitrogen or carbon dioxide or hydrogen? And the last question, yep, there we go. We got B exactly. And what is ammonia mostly used as today?
Fertilizer.
Yeah. So maybe I went a bit fast, but these were the 4 questions that we wanted just to make sure. So we can go through them again. I'll go back to the first question. So the answer to this one is coal is a fossil fuel. And then which are fossil fuels not made of? That's A, oxygen. And what do you get when you burn a fossil fuel? You get carbon dioxide. And then lastly, what is ammonia most used as today? Fertilizer. So C, Colin, you were answering spot on. Well done. Okay, so that concludes our discussion. If there's any more questions,